Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning to everyone inside of the who decided to come to the Hip Hop A Bridge to the Future for Our Youth workshop. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dion Chavis. I will be your presenter today. Thank you for joining us. I think we have about 15 people in, so that's good. We'll go ahead and get started. And I'll pull up the PowerPoint presentation for this workshop. Hopefully, everyone is able to see the screen. So just a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Dion Chavis. I am a media personality. I'm a speaker. I'm a trainer. By trade, a radio personality. I worked in radio for over 20 years until COVID actually came in, caused me to lose my job in radio about 6 months ago. I guess when COVID first started back in March or April, I was unfortunately laid off from my position as a nighttime radio personality here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So just greetings to everyone who is joining me, and glad I'm able to be a part of this event. But above and beyond all of those things, I'm actually a father first. I have a 16-year-old daughter who is just learning to drive, and I have a 2-year-old son who is just now beginning to get potty trained. So I'm actually getting it from both ends of the spectrum. So if you are a believer in the power of prayer, please keep me in your prayer because I'm really need as many prayers and thoughts and well wishes as I can possibly get, because like I said, I have a 16-year-old and I have a 2-year-old. So let's talk about the purpose of the workshop now that you know who I am. And let's see, let's pull up the PowerPoint. Here we go. So also, oh y'all, almost forgot. Also, don't forget, if you're on social media, please remember to tag me on social media at the Glad Dad. That's my handle on Instagram and on all social media platforms. So if you're in the workshop and if you want to take a picture of something on the screen, feel free to take a picture and shoot it to me. I'm always on Instagram. I'm always able to answer and respond to direct messages and things like that. So please feel free to just shoot me a message in the Instagram direct message, or also on Facebook on Messenger on Facebook at the Glad Dad. Feel free to like the page, the Glad Dad, on Facebook. So the purpose of this workshop, we'll talk about elements of both music and media that have a direct impact on our youth. We'll discover how certain views on popular culture differ from us, the views that we have, how they differ from the generation that is involved in pop culture now. Because of course, I was born in the 80s, so I'm an 80s baby. So my views on popular culture and the things that I grew up listening to and watching and consuming in terms of media, those things are totally different than those things that my daughter listens to and the things that she has grown up being a part of. So our views can be different from the young people. So we're going to talk about those differences and how we can kind of meet these young people where they are, and how we can use popular culture and use hip hop culture as a way to bridge the gap. So just a quick icebreaker question in the chat. I want you to drop it in the chat for me. What movie, song, or TV show has had the biggest impact on you? What movie, song, or TV show has had the biggest impact on you? If you can drop that in the chat, I'll be glad to shout those out, and Jenny will tell me what the responses are. Let's see if I can see the chat. Yep. So just in the chat, just let me know. Some people, a lot of times when I talk to people, they say the Cosby Show. Some people say I've heard the Wonder Years is one that I get a lot of times. A lot of people tell me musically the things that they've listened to. So just tell me what movie, song, or TV show has had the biggest impact on you, and tell me in the chat real quick how it shaped your life. Okay, I don't see anything coming through in the Zoom chat, Jenny. So so just think about that for a little bit. Just think about what elements of media are in your life and what they've done to you and what they've meant to you over the years. So we'll move on. So let's talk about what is pop culture. So pop culture, it's a combination of concepts and notions that are heavily influenced by mass media that spread throughout the day-to-day life of society members. So I'm a radio personality. I've worked in radio, like I said, for over 20 years. And the best example that I can give of what popular culture is and how it how it kind of happens, so to speak, is that have you ever been driving down the street and a song comes on the radio and you're just like, man, I just can't stand this song. This song is horrible. And then 2 weeks later, you're driving and the song comes on again, and you find yourself tapping your fingers and tapping your feet to the song. And then a couple of days later, the song pops in your head in the office, and then you get off of work, and then the song comes on the radio, and then you're singing all the words to the song. You got your windows down, and it's your favorite song in the world, right? Well, that's what popular culture is. Like, popular culture is a lot of times designed to spread throughout society, right? Because that's what radio. When I worked in radio, one of the things that we do, we program you to like certain things. We program you to hear certain songs. You know how you're driving and you say you get out of the car and a song comes on, I should say, and you're like, man, like this song just seems like it plays every single hour. You get out of the car and get back in the car, and the song is coming back on. Then you're just trying to figure out, well, how is this song always played? Well, that's how popular culture works, because the radio stations are programming you to love and like these songs. So I got some answers coming into the chat from the previous question. Some people said 8 is enough. Some people said that Lovely Day by Bill Withers, which is a great song. The Cosby Show, In the Moment, Christian music reminds me to be present where I am. As an adult, The Office, Reading Rainbow. Anita said there was a song from Depeche Mode called People Are People. It really made me realize how much we base our opinions on people we have never met or didn't take the time to get to know. Right, so it's safe to say that popular culture is something that we take with us wherever we go. You know, when I see people talk about TV shows like MASH, right? That's a show that's been off the air for probably 40 years, but I'm pretty sure that the people who watched that show and loved that show when it was on, or even when it was on reruns a while ago, they still can quote scenes from that show or remember funny lines from that show. And a lot of times we take those things with us, and we begin to use those things in our day-to-day lives. So that's how popular culture tends to just become a part of our day-to-day life. Just because we take it with us, it's not something that we just watch. It's not a one-off. We don't just watch a movie that we love one time and then we never think about it again. We don't just hear a song that we really, really like and we never listen to it again. We take it with us, and it becomes the soundtrack to our lives a lot of times. I'm pretty sure there's songs that people can remember, like, you know, what you were doing when you first heard this song, or where you were when you first watched this particular movie, or who you were with when you went to see movies, let's say like The Karate Kid or whatever the movie may be. So that's what popular culture is. That's what it looks like. And that's how we take it. And that's how it becomes a part of our day-to-day lives in society. So, quick discussion question. Since we're talking about popular culture, since we're talking about hip hop culture, and I would argue that hip hop culture is now popular culture because it's a part of the music that the kids are listening to. It's the part of the music, the most prominent music that the kids are listening to. So, my discussion question right now, and I want to take a few minutes to think about this. But my first question is, what impact does pop culture have on your work? And how do your views on popular culture differ from those of young people? So I want you to type these answers in the chat for me. And I know there might be a brief delay, but let me know, what impact does popular culture have on your work in whatever you do, whatever capacity you work in? And how do your views on popular culture differ from those of young people? Now, as someone who works in radio, I also have the opportunity to go out and talk to a lot of young people and have conversations with young folks. So I know that their views on popular culture, the things that they listen to, the things that they watch, are totally different than the things that I grew up listening to, right? And the things that I'm even interested in now, because I'm an adult. The things that I'm interested in at 40 are totally different than the things that I was interested in at the age of 15 or 16 or 14 or whatever the case may be. So in your work, I would like to know, what impact does popular culture have on what you do, and how do your views on popular culture differ from those of young people? Just type that in the chat for me. Do you see any differences between the things that your children are listening to? Do you think that the music and the movies are too graphic? Do you think that they have easy access to too many things? Just let me know in the chat, what are the differences that your views are on popular culture? Catherine said, I work for a domestic violence program, and we oftentimes use music in our support group for domestic violence victims to express their feelings. That's good. Yeah, using music in those group settings always helps because everyone has, again, songs that they can relate to, songs that they can gravitate to, that take them to a specific place to help them through certain times. Especially if you are a lover of music, or if you're a lover of a certain artist, like hearing certain music can make you feel can feel really good. Somebody said that gospel music earlier. They said that gospel music or Christian music helps them get centered and helps them be where they need to be. Michelle said it has really negative effect on their views of themselves. Michelle, if you could unpack that a little bit for me, what type of negative views do you think that that popular culture has on the young people, and how do your views differ from that? Because I really want to know what our views are. I want to know what your views are versus what the views of the young people are. Ashley said, right now, with the popular culture view of law enforcement, there's a great impact on our work. Right now, very negative impact, especially use of social media to get information because it is opinion based rather than fact based. So many young people are under and misinformed. Great answer. Yeah, and I think, with social media, that's one thing we'll tackle in just a little bit. Social media gives young people easy access. It's almost instant gratification, right? Because they have it, not just young people, but all of us. We have the information at the palm of our hands, and everything that we see is not always factual. Let's see. Eden said, working with juveniles, pop culture has a big impact when I'm able to connect. Scroll up. When I'm able to connect with them on something of their interest, it builds a connection. It's nice when they can identify a song that expresses their feelings to help me understand where they are at emotionally. That's great. We'll tackle that in a little bit. Stacy said, popular culture impacts the views of my clients. They're much more aware of social justice issues and are probably more tolerant. I tend to think that a lot of my daughter's music has a lot of sex in it, but the kids seem to not notice it at all. And Michelle came back and said that in their peers, because it makes them think that they are untouchable, and drugs and alcohol play a big role in everything. Great answers, guys. So let's look at pop culture over the years. Let's look at pop culture over the years and what it looked like and how it has kind of transcended over the years. So let's start with the 70s. So in the 70s, just in the chat real quick, help me out. Type some things that were considered as a part of popular culture in the 70s. Things like Soul Train, Farrah Fawcett was in the 70s. The first Rocky movie was in the 70s. Good Times was in the 70s. Rock and roll was a huge deal in the 70s. What are some other things that were popular in the 70s? The 70s were a great time. Bell bottoms, things like that, afros, a lot of different types of music, right? Hippies were popular in the 70s. Stacey said American Bandstand, right? So all of those things were popular in the 70s. So I like to ask people in the 70s, I want you to think about this. How was music consumed in the 1970s? How was music consumed in the 1970s? And if you had a song or artist that you love and they were releasing new music, how would you get your hands on that music? And let me know, how would you play that music? How would you consume it? How would you listen to it? How would you become familiar with it? What are some things that you would do to consume music in the 1970s? Now you all might be a little bit too young for this, so I don't know. Y'all might be too young to remember this, but I know for a fact that at one point in time in the 70s, there was this thing that's on the screen. It's called a record player. Do y'all remember the record player? And they were records. They were huge discs almost. I have some of them behind me. And you put them on a turntable and you put a needle on it. Are y'all old enough to remember that? Well, you put the needle on it and it would play the record, right? And I always ask people when they would get their records and they take them home and they put them on the record player, where would the record player be located? Stacey said she still owes Columbia House some money. You and me both, Stacey. Those putting those dimes on the paper and sending it back and getting 25 tapes, right? But when we would listen to our records back in the day, what would we do? The record player would be located in the living room, right? So the living room would be the central location for everyone to listen to their music most times. You would put your record on the record player. Mom could listen to it. Dad could hear it. Brother, sister, y'all might get into an argument about which record you were going to play, all of those things, right? But the record player was centrally located, and most times everyone knew in the household what was being played. So then we move on to the 80s. What were some of the things that were popular in pop culture in the 80s? We had things like The Cosby Show. We touched on that earlier. Whitney Houston was popular, right? Madonna, Bobby McFerrin. Videos came out in the 80s. Remember MTV when they actually played music videos? Yeah, that was a time. Now all they play is reality TV shows and stuff that I probably don't even watch anymore. But at one point in time, for those that don't, again, maybe you all are too young, I don't know. But at one point in time, MTV actually played videos. Somebody said Duran Duran, right? And on the hip hop side, there were groups out like NWA. NWA was a huge group back in the 80s. They were a group who sold millions and millions of records doing a form of rap that was coined as being gangster rap, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So it changes, right? And also what we didn't say is that the Walkman comes around. And anyone have a Walkman, a Sony Walkman in the 80s? I know I did. So that means that our listening experience now is a little bit more personal, right? It's not just if I want to listen to something and I have to play it on a record player. It's now that I have the ability to listen to it in my ear, in my headphones, right? And that's where things start to change a little bit because if we have a tape that we listen to or a tape that we were able to get that maybe had some profanity in it, mom and dad don't necessarily know what we're listening to because we're listening to it in our headphones. So that gives us the ability to have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more privacy with what we're listening to. So things started to change. So then in the 90s, what are some of the things that were popular in the 90s? I'll skip straight to it. The way that we are consuming music changes in the 90s, right? There's this thing called the CD that comes along, and the CD makes it so we don't have to listen to our music in an analog form. We don't have to flip the tape over when it gets from side A to side B. It just keeps playing continuously. And then the record, the folks who are distributing and producing the music, they can make it faster because it's created digitally, not in an analog format. But then also in the 90s, there's this thing called the internet that comes along and kind of takes us all by storm. America Online. Does anyone remember when you would get the America Online CDs in the mail? They would give you 30 days free, and you would put the CD in your computer, and you would have to actually connect the computer to your phone line, and it will make that noise. All right, that's what changes. So now we have the ability to connect with people who are millions of miles away without even being in the same room with them. We have the ability to connect with folks for the first time, aside from writing a letter or aside from being someone's pen pal. If you're in London or somewhere and I'm in Nebraska where you guys are and I want to connect with you, I just plug up my internet and wait for that little man to actually run across the screen and connect. And I'm connected to the World Wide Web. So things changed a little bit in the 90s, right? Then in the 2000s, what happens? 2000s, music changes, culture changes. We begin to get more access to celebrities. This thing called the cell phone really starts to become popular. Another social media platform comes up, MySpace, right? So with MySpace, again, it gives us the ability to create a profile based on who we are or who we want to be. And as a 20 or 19 or 18-year-old young person, then I can create my MySpace page and connect with people across the world once again. But most importantly about the 2000s, you have YouTube, right? YouTube comes out, and then YouTube allows us to be able to connect and see videos and see people and see images that we didn't always have access to. But above and beyond that, this thing called the iPod comes out. Remember the iPod? This is when you actually had to have a separate device from your phone to listen to music. So now not only is my listening experience personal, now I get to curate my own playlists. Now I get to decide what I want to hear, when I want to hear it, and how I want to hear it. And no one has any idea what I'm listening to, what I'm downloading. So if I want to go on the internet and websites like Napster and BearShare and I can't think of those other websites that will just put tons and tons of spam and malware on your parents' computers back in the early 2000s. But I could get whatever music I wanted to get. And I could put it right on my iPod, and my iPod would hold 50,000 songs. And if I want to hear music about killing or music about violence or music about Christmas music or whatever the case may be, then guess what? I have it right in the palm of my hand. So again, the listening experience changes because now I become the curator of my own playlist. I don't have to wait for the radio station to tell me what to play. I don't have to wait for my favorite video to come on MTV. I don't have to wait for, to make a tape or a recording of music off of the radio. I have it right in the palm of my hand. I don't have to wait for my parents to tell me when I can and can't listen to something. I can listen to it at my leisure. So it changes a little bit, right? It becomes easier for me to access things that are popular. It becomes easier for me to decide what's popular to me because I don't have to wait for someone to tell me. But then this thing called Facebook, I forgot about that. Facebook also comes around in the 2000s. And we all know how that turned out. I don't even have to go into detail about Facebook, right? Because I'm sure that probably 95% of us here, probably 99% of us have had or currently have a Facebook page. And we know the impact that Facebook has had on us as a society, us culturally, and we see what it has done and what we've been able to accomplish or not accomplish with Facebook. You know, some people say it was good because it allowed us to stay connected to family and friends and connect with people that we hadn't seen in years. And then some people say that it's bad based on the impact that it's had on us socially, politically, all of those things. Facebook is now a part of our everyday life. So that's the 2000s. 2010 to present, things have changed a little bit more. So when we look at 2010, now we have social media. We still have all of those elements, but we have it where? In the palm of our hand, right? And when it comes to our celebrities, when it comes to the people that we look up to, the people that we see on TV, we have easy access to them because of this thing called Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. So I don't have to wait until a magazine comes out to know what my favorite celebrity is doing every month. I can know what they're doing every minute, every hour, just by going to their Instagram page, just by going to their stories, and now going to TikTok, going to Snapchat. So it's a little bit different. But not only that, we also have reality TV. Reality TV plays a huge role in the thought process of our young people and how they think and how they operate. I never forget, I was doing a workshop for a group of young people a couple of years ago. And it was a career activity that we were doing. And I asked this young lady what she wanted to, the activity was what she wanted to do when you graduated high school. So this young lady said that she wasn't going to go to college, but she was going to become a basketball wife. If you don't know, Basketball Wives is a reality TV show that comes on VH1. And I was a little bit confused because I've never seen a basketball wife as a career. Like, it's not on monster.com. It's not on Indeed. It's not on ZipRecruiter. So I was a little bit confused as to how she was going to become a basketball wife. So she told me, she said, I'm going to marry a basketball player. We're going to be rich and we're going to live the rest of our lives on reality TV. Now, I had to tell her that was the dumbest thing that I've ever heard in my life. And she didn't understand it at the time, but I would gladly say now and happily say now that that young woman went on to become a college graduate who graduated on the dean's list from North Carolina A&T University and is going on to do great things. But the 14 and 15-year-old young woman compared to she's probably 21 or 22 now, they're totally different. But we have to realize the impact that social media and that reality TV and the music plays in the lives of these young people. They don't think that it's not real. To them, it's their reality. But it's our job to counter that reality with what's really real in the world and to give them as much knowledge as we possibly can on the way that life really is. Because thinking that you're going to get married and become a basketball wife, that's just a fantasy, right? That's just a fantasy that you're thinking about, and you're not thinking about what your future is really going to entail. But sometimes we have to be, not sometimes, but all the time, we have to be real with these young people and be authentic with them and let them know what their future can really hold and what their future really should look like if they focus. All right, so another discussion question. And I hope everyone has a pen and paper, but you can jot this down in the chat. How does the media portray, and I want to see this in the chat, how does the media portray African-American males on television, in music and in movies? And how do you think these views affect the way that African-American males see themselves? How does the media portray African-American males on television, movies, and music? And how do you think these views affect the way that young African-American males see themselves? I want to take just a few minutes to get some answers in the chat. Anita replied to a previous question. She said, social media has created a perception is reality mentality for our youth. It's troubling. I agree with that 100%. So let's see if we can get some answers to this one. How does the media portray African-American males on television and movies and in music? How do you think these views affect the way that the African-American males see themselves? Curtis, I'm sorry, said gangsters, drug dealers, deadbeats in prison. Great answers. Anybody else? Troubled, gay, thug, said Michelle. Good answers. Let's take one more. Let me get one more. A lot of times I hear athletes. Sometimes I hear always the character, no moral compass, said Beth. Good answer. Okay. So let's look at the impact that media portrayals have had on African-American boys. So a recent study that was done by the Opportunity Agenda found that media portrayals and stereotypes were strongly linked to lower life expectations among Black males. Black males can also become victims of perception when they internalize stereotypes and biases, because a lot of times, if that's all I see, if the only thing that I see on television is the Black male as a thug, as a deadbeat, then a lot of times that's what I'm going to start to internalize those things, right? I'm going to think that that's all that I can be, that's all that I can become. Because there's a lack of balance, because there isn't any sort of proper representation of who I really am. There's no reflection of who I really am on television, right? So if we say that so many of our young people are constantly consuming media, and we'll dive into this a little bit, if we say that so many of us are constantly consuming media, whether it be television, whether it be music, whether it be social media, all of those things, and if the only reflection that I see of myself is a negative stereotype, then I'll begin to internalize that, and I'll begin to think that's all that I can be, that's all that I can do, that's all that I can become. So there was a study done by a gentleman by the name of Claude Steele and another guy by the name of Joshua Aronson called Stereotype Threat. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this, but this study was profiled in a book called Whistling Vivaldi. And Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson did the study. And what stereotype threat is, it's the risk of confirming negative stereotypes about a person, right? So whether it be your ethnic, racial, your gender, or your cultural group, it's also a very important factor in understanding why so many young Black males are performing at a lower level academically, right? Especially when it comes to things like standardized testing. When taking standardized tests, Black college students in this study, they performed poorly when they were reminded that their racial group tends to underperform on such exams. Because again, the stereotype about Black folks is that they're not necessarily going to perform well when it comes time to take tests. But in the same study, when those same young people were not reminded of race, the Black students perform similarly to their white peers. So it's a stereotype that if you are African American, that you're not supposed to do well, that you're not going to do well, because the media and society tells you that you're not necessarily going to perform well on those standardized tests. Another example of stereotype threat. In this study, women performed worse on math tests when they thought that the test was going to produce gender differences, because the stereotype is that women are not good at math, women are not good at science, right? Also in the same study, white men performed worse on math tests when they thought that they were competing against Asians, because of course the stereotype is that Asians are stronger in math than everyone else. Also, Black students performed worse than white students on the GRE when they were told that the test was measuring their abilities. But when those same students were told that the test is not measuring their abilities, they perform just as well. So again, the name of the book that this study is profiled in is called Whistling Vivaldi. I implore everyone to check this book out. It goes into detail about stereotype threat. But also Black males are often aware of those stereotypes, right? Just like you are aware when someone has a stereotype about you, whether you're a blonde or whether you wear glasses, or whether people think that because you're a woman, you can't drive, you're aware of those stereotypes, right? And a lot of times the Black males, we portray those stereotypes and we begin to act out on those things. Because again, we internalize the stereotypes. So whether it be the stereotype of us being a drug dealer, us being unemployed, deadbeat, over-aggressive, hypersexual, all of these things that are portrayed in the media, we are aware that these stereotypes exist. So let's look at media exposure, because it's important to look at not just what the media is, but also how much exposure our young people are having to this media. And of course, today's children are more exposed than any other generation, right? They're more exposed to media than any other generation prior to them, due to the smartphones, due to their computers, due to their television, due to tablets, so many different forms of media that they have at their disposal. I'll tell anybody, I think today's children are born with a diaper that has a tablet on the inside to it. Right? My son is 2 years old. He already knows how to swipe on my phone. He already knows what he wants to watch. If an ad comes up on YouTube, he knows how to click away from the ad. If one of his shows is on and an ad comes on in the middle of the ad, then he'll walk away from it and come back when the commercial goes off. So this generation of young people, they're smart, right? They're very tech savvy because they've been exposed to so much media. They've had so much exposure to it. Children learn and observe this information. But overexposure to pop culture can cause them to do what? It can cause them to mimic the traits that they see, right? They can start to act out. They can start to do the things that they see on TV, just like a child. When a child sees a nursery rhyme, or a toddler sees a nursery rhyme on YouTube and he starts to sing Baby Shark, doot, 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 right? That it's the same thing, right? It's all because of overexposure, because of the repetition that they're receiving from watching these forms of media. More numbers for you. Another study that was done said that excessive media is associated with obesity, lack of sleep, problems in school, aggression, destructive behaviors. I was listening to a story on NPR a couple of months ago, and this story was about a young lady who had become addicted to watching fight videos on YouTube. And a fight video was just a video that the young people record of people fighting each other, whether it be in the street, whether it be in school, whether it be going up to someone's house and getting into a fight. This young lady was addicted to these videos, and she was so addicted that she had to actually go see a therapist because she didn't know how to separate what was going on in those videos from her reality. She became detached from school. She was an honor student. She became someone who wasn't doing well in school. She wasn't performing well. Her parents became concerned about her, and they actually took her to a therapist, right? Because she couldn't get away from her desire to watch these videos. The average 8 to 10-year-old spends almost 8 hours a day using different types of media. Now, this study was done pre-COVID, so I can imagine the amount of time that our young people are spending on their devices now. Of course, they have to be, for a lot of them, they have to be on their tablets and on their devices for school. But a lot of times they are probably 75% of 12 to 17-year-olds on a cell phone. Like I said, my daughter is 16, and she can't live without her cell phone. If she were to not have this device right here, I don't know. I don't know if she would. I don't know if she would make it. I just don't. Right. But there's a connection with the way that they use their cell phone and the way that the things that they're viewing and the things that they're watching on their cell phones and their behavior. More numbers for you. 2012 study done by Nielsen said that 48% of adults still discovered their music on the radio, followed by 10% who discovered music through friends and family, and 7% who discovered their music on YouTube. Well, conversely, teenagers are discovering their music from the internet. 64% of teens surveyed said that they discovered their new music from YouTube. And the difference between discovering new music on YouTube and discovering new music on the radio is that YouTube has this thing called an algorithm, right? So an algorithm makes it so if they find out or they discover that you like a certain artist, and they're going to keep feeding you artists that are similar to that same artist that you're listening to, right? Netflix has an algorithm. So if you're watching something on Netflix and after it's over, they recommend something else for you to watch, that's an algorithm. So these young people, they're getting a more sophisticated design of ways to listen to their music, because they're not listening to the radio. And the difference between the radio and YouTube is that YouTube is unfiltered, it's uncensored. There's no way that someone is going to put all of the edited versions of their music on YouTube like they do on a radio station, right? So that's something that we have to be aware of. That, again, this is a study that was done in 2012. That was 8 years ago. Just think about how the world has changed in 8 years. So that 64% is probably closer to 80% at this point, right? So I like to call this generation the YouTube generation. Some millennials who were born between the early 80s into early 2000s and the generation that follow make up what has been called the YouTube generation. This is a generation that was born into this sense of technology. These folks are highly connected to each other because of their lifelong use of communication. They've had access to tablets and iPhones and Androids and iPads and all of those things, and portable MP3 players. All those things are important to them. So that's why this generation, they live off of their connectivity to each other. When I was in school, if you went to school with someone and you had a problem with them and you handled your problem after school and y'all might have gotten into a fight at 3 o'clock when the bell rang, that was it. You get on the bus and you go home. Now it's a little bit different. Now, if you have a problem with someone in school, you have an altercation with them in school, you exchange words and something happens and you go home and that person and all of your friends are still right with you in the palm of your hand. You're not disconnected from them in any way. You're not disconnected from what happens in school in any way. Simply because you have the ability to connect with your friends, to connect with your classmates, to connect with the person who might be bullying you. Whether it be on social media, whether it be in a group chat. You don't lose that connection when you get off the bus and go home every day. Couple of stars of the YouTube generation. I think it's important to recognize these folks because a lot of the companies that we know and that we use are capitalizing on this technology-driven generation. They're young artists like Chloe and Halle, Bryson Tiller, Justin Bieber, The Weeknd, who's actually going to perform at the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, this year or next year. Were all discovered on YouTube or SoundCloud, right? They received lucrative recording contracts, TV show deals, other endorsements. Like I said, The Weeknd is performing at the Super Bowl in January. So the stars of YouTube are here. Like there's no more just, sitting around and the young people just going to a radio station and hoping that someone plays their demo. That's not how they're getting discovered. That's not how they're even discovering their music anymore. It's all done online. I think it's important that we know what products are marketed by these popular artists. Beats by Dre headphones, of course, everybody knows those. They retail for $300 with an annual sales of close to $500 million, right? Beats by Dre were purchased by Apple. That company was bought out by Apple for a couple of $1 billion a few years ago. In 2017, rapper Lil Yachty signed a multi-endorsement deal with Target, Adidas, and Sprite. Also became the creative director of the Nautica clothing brand. Also, Jay-Z. Of course, Jay-Z is probably one of the most successful artists in hip hop history. He signed a $20 million deal with Samsung a couple of years back for them to promote his album for him. $20 million. If anybody watches TV, it's probably impossible to watch TV without watching the TV or hearing about the TV show Power, a show that was produced and created by 50 Cent. It's now one of the most popular TV shows on television. If you on social media, that's what people are talking about during the season. They're talking about Power. So these are all people who come from the hip hop generation and all people who our young folks are looking up to, who they're admiring, who they are taking in and consuming media that's created by them. So another discussion question in the chat: how do you think we can use these products and brands that are promoted by the celebrities as a tool to help the young people? How can we use the products and brands that are promoted by celebrities as tools to help our young people? There are a lot of products out there that are marketed and promoted by people in hip hop culture. How do you think we can use those things to our advantage? Or even use the ideas behind those things to our advantage? In the chat, just let me know. Do you think that we should use them as a way to connect or stay connected ourselves? Do you think that it's a good idea for the young people to stay away? Maybe you don't think it's a good idea to use those the brands that are promoted by these hip hop stars. Let me know in the chat what you think. Shayla said identifying similar strengths. I like that. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's a good point. Beth said become familiar with them. Yeah, and I think I'm gonna go back to what Shayla said. Identifying similar strengths is great because a lot of times these young people may come from similar circumstances as these artists, right? They may come from a similar background as these artists. 50 Cent is someone who was shot 9 times, right? And there are other artists who are younger than 50 Cent who the young people can relate to probably a little bit more. But you know, regardless of what you think about him as a person, his story is awesome. He went from being shot 9 times to being one of the best businessmen in entertainment, right? Michelle said, in my groups, we highlight the creativeness, self-determination, and finding their purposes. All good answers. Great. I like it, guys. So let's talk about gangs for a minute. I don't think it would be fair to talk about hip hop culture without talking about gangs. And I'm not sure if there is a huge gang problem where you guys are, but I know all over the country, gangs are, you know, it's a concern for a lot of people, especially dealing with our young folks. And I think, you know, hip hop right now has it's in a cycle where it is promoting gang culture. But I think it's important to understand that, believe it or not, hip hop actually was created as an alternative to gangs, right? Back in 1973, hip hop was created as an alternative to gangs in the Bronx, right? Someone said we have a number of gangs in Omaha and Lincoln, as well as some of the smaller cities. Okay. So back in 73, gang leader Africa Mambata in the Bronx, he shifted his focus of his gang, the Black Spades, to become a group that focused on more positive, responsible actions, right? And this group that he created was called the Zulu Nation, and hip hop was birthed out of that. So when we look at where hip hop came from, it was actually supposed to be, it was intended to be an alternative to what gangs were doing and the mayhem that they were creating in New York City back in the 70s. So let's look at some of the gangs. Now, I know the gentleman that's on the left side of the screen, some of you may recognize him as Detective Fin Tutuola from Law and Order SVU, but that's actually a gentleman by the name of Ice-T. And he is one of the forefathers of gangster rap. Back in 1986, he had a song called 6 in the Morning. And many people consider that song as one of the first gangster rap songs. Now, you always use Ice-T as an example as someone who has transformed his life around and went from creating music about gangs and creating music about the lifestyle that he came from and the lifestyle that he lived to being probably one of the most prominent known figures in Hollywood, right? I don't know anybody who won't recognize Ice-T if they saw him, simply because of his acting and the things that he's gone on to accomplish. Then also in 1988, the group NWA released an album called Straight Outta Compton. That album would go on to sell 3 million copies. The album was filled with violence, sexual lyrics that highlighted the life of young Black men in Compton, California. And just think about it, in 1998, 3 million albums is a lot, right? That's a lot. So I tell people all the time, don't think that gangster rap became what it was because it's only young Black kids in the ghetto who were purchasing these albums, right? 3 million albums had to be there had to be a lot of copies sold in the suburbs. There had to be some copies that were sold in the area where there were some rich white folks buying these albums, right? Because at the end of the day, in 1998, Black folks didn't necessarily have the means to buy 3 million copies of an album from one group, right? NWA became popular because they were outlawed, they were banned. The government tried to say that they weren't good, that we shouldn't listen to them. And we all know whenever you tell young people not to do something, they're going to do the exact opposite. And that's why NWA became so popular, right? And that's why gangster rap became so popular. That's why gangster rap became a part of pop culture back in the 80s, because it wasn't just one group of people. It wasn't just one segment of the population that were listening to their music. It was everyone. Right? It was young folks from all over the country who were listening to NWA, who were listening to Ice-T. Rappers like Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg has been associated with gang life. Snoop Dogg has been associated with the Rolling Crips in California. And back in the 90s, he had an album that was called Doggy Style, and Dr. Dre had an album that's called Chronic, which many people think is one of the greatest albums of all times. Those albums were filled with lyrics and references about gang life. But again, I'll say there is no one who in 2020 does not know Snoop Dogg, does not know a Snoop Dogg song. So he's taking that persona of being a gangster rapper and transformed it into being someone who now has his own little league Pee Wee football team, right? Someone who's doing great things in the community, someone who we now look up to as almost like an uncle, an elder statesman in the culture. So after the 90s, hip hop culture starts to accept gang life in a different way, right? So it starts to go from the West Coast, and then it starts to go into the Midwest, and then the East Coast, and these thing called DVDs. I don't know if y'all remember DVDs, right? They look like CDs. You put them in, you actually watch them. DVDs started to circulate with rappers promoting their gang lifestyle. Right. So now, again, kind of like what we saw with MTV and with music being able to be seen on video. Now we have access to DVD to get an inside look, an all access pass, so to speak, to our rappers' lives. And if they are promoting gang music and gang violence, then we begin to see that unedited version, almost like a precursor to what YouTube is now. We begin to see it on DVDs. So real quick, 4 facts on gangs that you might not have known. A recent study said that 1/5 of school administrators admitted that there was gang activity in their school. Only 1/5 of school administrators and teachers admitted that there was gang activity. And I think that's a problem. I think for a lot of us, that's the issue. A lot of us are afraid to admit that there's gang activity going on. That's 4 out of 5 schools who refuse to admit they have a problem with gangs, right? And I just don't think that is a realistic expectation, a realistic way to go about these things, because even though you may not see them, I tell the young people that I talk to all the time, you all are the eyes and the ears of the school. The students know what's going on much faster than the teachers and the administrators do, right? So if a teacher or an administrator in a school in America today is thinking that they don't have a gang problem, or they don't have any sort of gang activity in their school, especially if there's a Title I school, there's something wrong. And we've got to correct that. And we have to do a better job of recognizing that there are some things going on in our schools that we may not be willing to accept, we may not be willing to deal with, but we have to take accountability and start finding ways to resolve these issues. School-based gang intervention programs have a positive impact on the overall student body, but the children who are most at risk for gang activity, they usually don't benefit because they're not the ones coming to school, right? A lot of the gang members who are young people, they're not coming to school. They've dropped out. But places like churches and rec centers are more likely to reach the children who avoid school. So it's the people who are actually on the ground. It's the grassroots efforts. It's the people who are actually in the trenches, like a lot of you are, who have the ability to reach these young people and help them get rid of this gang activity. A lot of people think that gangs are people join gangs, or young people join gangs because of wanting to be tough. But a lot of times these young people are joining gangs because of safety. A lot of times they're joining gangs because they want to make sure that they can get from the bus stop to the front door of their house without having something happen to them, right? A lot of times they're joining these gangs because they want to make sure nothing happens to their mom when she drives into the parking lot from the grocery store. So we have to take those things into consideration. Number one deflector of gang violence in schools is the physical presence of adults. And I would say that doesn't even just go for schools. That just goes for our communities. That goes in the lives for our young people. We have to show up. We have to show up, and we have to be there and show these young people there's a different way. We can't just deter them by saying, just say no to gangs. That's not going to work. We have to physically be present for these young people. When it comes to schools, the study shows that when an adult is present in the hallway, in the cafeteria, or in the common areas, that reduces the likelihood of gang activity occurring. Same thing goes for in our communities. We can't be afraid to talk to these young people. We can't be afraid to have these conversations with these young people about the music that they're listening to, the impact that the gang culture is having on their lives. And like I said, These young people, a lot of them are joining gangs for safety, not necessarily for glory. A lot of them are intimidated. They're looking for a sense of security. They live in these low-income houses. They want to be sure that they can be protected. They want to be sure that they don't have to worry about harm coming to them or coming to their families. They're looking for an outlet. So now that we talked about the gangs and the negative activity, let's talk about some of the positives. Just in the chat, really quick, I want to see if I can get three people to tell me who are positive influences or positive artists in hip hop music that you know of. Who are some positive artists in hip hop music? Some positive artists. Beth said De La Soul, A Tribe Called Quest. Those are actually two of my favorite groups, Beth. Great answer. Great answers. Run DMC. Stacy said Run DMC. What about positive artists for this generation? I should have clarified. What about positive artists for this generation? Unfortunately, my 16-year-old, she's not going to listen to Run DMC. She should. Chance the Rapper, said James. Good answer. Anybody else? Give me one more. One more. Common. Yes. Thank you, Beth. Great answer. Great answer. So let's Chance the Rapper. Let's talk about Mr. Chance. So I think it's important that when we talk about gang activity and the negative side of the music and the culture, I think it's important that we talk about the positives, right? Because these young people, they need to have positive reinforcements. And I think there are positive folks who are out there who speak directly to this young generation that we have to be aware of because they're doing great things. Chance the Rapper, he's a Grammy-winning rapper who not only makes positive music, but also he donates money to the Chicago school system. Last I checked, this number, that $3 million, was actually $5 million. So he's donated at least $5 million to the Chicago school system. And not only that, I would say he's just a positive example of someone who is married, and he and his wife have 2 children together, I believe. And they just flaunt their love for each other all over social media and all over the internet. You can always find pictures of him and his wife. He's a young man. He's probably in his mid-20s, maybe, but just a great artist, someone who, again, who young people love. They listen to his music. They know his songs, but he's a great example of someone who's doing positive things with his music and with his platform. Also, J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar. Those are 2 rappers who use their influence and use their voice to speak out and inspire social change, right? Kendrick's song "We Gonna Be All Right" was the soundtrack that many people use for protesting social injustices in 2015. So those are people. I think someone talked earlier about social issues going on in our society and in our world and in our culture. These are 2 artists who are speaking directly to those social issues, speaking directly about those social issues, and who are doing everything that they can to use their platform for positive change and to speak to the young people and to give the young people a balance, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what type of balance are you providing. Also, Rhapsody. Rhapsody is from right here in North Carolina. She's actually signed to Jay-Z's record label. She's a positive role model for girls who are a lot of times used to only seeing women who are promoting sex and who are promoting promiscuity, right? Rhapsody is a young lady who promotes empowerment and who promotes lifting up other women. So for every Cardi B that you might see, and I have absolutely no problems with Cardi B, but again, I think it's about balance. So for every Cardi B, there's a Rhapsody. And I think women need, especially young girls, they need to see positive influences. They need to see people who look like them. They need to see people who are telling them that they are queens and people who are telling them that they can do things without having to be sexual about it, or without having to show their body or flaunt their body. I think it's important that we have that balance, especially for someone like me who I have a daughter. So she listens to Rhapsody, right? But I think it's important that she has someone who speaks a certain language, who is closer to her age, a lot closer to her age than I am, who doesn't necessarily want people to look at her in a sexual way, right? So that's important that we give our young women options and balance to say, okay, this is cool on this side, and Cardi B is cool, and Megan Thee Stallion, and all of these people are cool, but on this side, here's someone else that you might be interested in checking out. So let's look at teaching points real quick. First, don't condemn and criticize. Instead, we can do a better job of evaluating and explaining. I think we have to understand that, where we come from and the music that we listen to growing up in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, some of us, a lot of times it's no different. I tell people all the time, sex, drugs, and rock and roll has been a thing for as long as I can remember, right? There's always been sex, there's always been drugs, there's always been some form of rock and roll or some sort of music where the young people are listening to as a form of rebellion, or they're listening to that their parents may not like. If you grew up listening to Guns N' Roses, right? Your parents didn't like you listening to Guns N' Roses. They thought it was garbage. They thought it was trash. If you grew up listening to Metallica, your parents didn't like you listening to Metallica. If you grew up listening to Boy George, your parents didn't like you listening to Boy George. If you grew up listening to Marvin Gaye, if you grew up listening to the Notorious B.I.G., every generation has their music. Every generation has their time. Every generation has their culture. And it's up to us to sit back and tell these young people that, I was also young at a point in time, right? I was also a teenager and I had my music and I had my time. And this is what I learned from those times. This is what I learned from those artists that I listened to. This is what I learned from those movies that I watched. This is what I learned from those circumstances that I was in at 16 that you're probably going to find yourself in also, whether it relates to drugs, whether it relates to sex, whether it relates to alcohol, whether it relates to texting and driving. We've all been there, right? I tell my daughter all the time, I've been 16, you've never been 40. So I know what it's like to be a 16-year-old. I know what it's like to be a 16-year-old girl, but I sure know what it's like to be a 16-year-old boy. And 16-year-old boys only thinking about one thing, right? So, we have to do a better job of not just condemning them and criticizing them, but explaining and evaluating the situations. And I think open and honest dialogue is the key, right? We have to talk to them about what they're listening to. We have to talk to them about what they're watching. We have to discuss with them what they're reading. And I'll go in a little bit of detail about this. I think it's important that we understand that this generation is the first generation, particularly in hip hop culture, that has been open and direct about their struggles with mental health. We're seeing a generation of young people who are going through mental health issues, who are battling depression, who are battling anxiety, who are battling substance abuse and dependency. They're self-medicating. I can't tell you how many of these young artists have recently died of a drug overdose, or who I've listened to, and I can just hear them crying out for help as they talk about their depression. Those are things that we have to take in consideration, right? Because this is what our young people are listening to. And the music that they're listening to, as we said earlier, if it's a part of popular culture, then it becomes a part of your day-to-day life. So if you're listening to artists who constantly talks about depression and who constantly talks about how sad they are, then that's going to become a part of your life. So we have to start having these open conversations with these young people about mental health. We have to start having these open conversations with them about what they're listening to and the effect that it is having on them on a day-to-day basis. Because if we don't, then they're only going to be stuck with one side of it. And that side is going to come from the artist that they're listening to. And we also have to use these principles that the music artists are using in their business ventures to teach them about how to be an entrepreneur. Teach them how to get out here and not necessarily have to work for anyone but themselves. Teach them how to be their own business, right? Teach them how to create and start an LLC. My daughter, fortunately, just started her own business recently. So those same principles that we talked about earlier, the same principles that we talked about with 50 Cent and Beats by Dre and Lil Yachty and all of these artists who are now venturing into the world of entrepreneurialism, we have to be able to teach our young people the same way. We have to be able to allow them to take the positives from hip hop culture and use those things to move on and go about their lives, right? So how can you use pop culture to help you? I think we can create lessons that'll keep children engaged and challenge them. And by lessons, I mean life lessons, right? Because they may not necessarily remember everything that we tell them, but we have to take the time to get their minds to function in a way that looks at popular culture from a perspective that's a little bit different than the way the world sees it. Right, popular culture gives us the opportunity to have conversations and to engage with young people. But let's not take that popular culture and just look at it from a tunnel view. Let's use popular culture and use the things that are going on in popular culture as a way to challenge these young people, to get them to think about things a little bit differently, to think about things critically. Because again, as a functioning adult, you're going to have to be a critical thinker. You're not going to be able to be just have the group think mentality and think the way that the masses think. We want our young people to think for themselves. We want them to think independently without needing the media to tell them what narrative they have to create, without needing television and movies and music to tell them who they can be and what their limits are. No. We have to use popular culture as a way to challenge them and to get them to think outside of the box. Also, it's a conversation starter. We can use it to start conversations, whether it be at home, the classroom, whether it be in the courthouse, wherever we are. It's a conversation starter. If you see a young person and there's a young person around, I promise you there's something going on in pop culture that you can talk to them about, whether it be movies, whether it be music, TV shows. There are real issues that can be addressed every single day, particularly in the climate that we're in. In the social climate that we're in right now, there's always something that you can use to have a conversation with young people. About a year or two ago, my daughter came with me to a workshop that I did with a group of teenagers. It was a group of, I believe it was 15 and 16-year-olds. And this workshop was designed to help them become better leaders. So we're sitting through the workshop and I'm talking to them, and I always like to find out what the young people are listening to. So I asked them what they were listening to, and they told me that they were listening to this particular artist, and it is going on and telling me about how this artist is the best thing since sliced bread, and just raving about this artist. And I know who the artist is, but I'm pretending like I don't. So as they're talking to me, I'm like, okay, you guys are really, you're really telling me some stuff that I didn't know. So during the workshop, we go on a break. And as we're on break, I get a notification on my phone. And as I look at the notification on my phone, the notification is from TMZ, and it tells me that this artist, his name is XXXTentacion, had been shot and killed. I'd never seen a sadder group of young people in my life once I told them the news, right? My daughter was there with me. That in turn turned into a conversation with her about grief. Because I didn't know it at the time, but this was the first time that she had experienced grief because this was an artist that she was fond of. But as I thought about it over a couple of days, I realized that this is the same way that I felt in 1997 when my favorite rapper died. This is the same way that people felt when Elvis Presley died. It's the same way that people felt when Michael Jackson died. It's the same way that people felt when Marvin Gaye was shot and killed. It's the same way people felt when Tupac was killed. Same way people felt earlier this year when Kobe Bryant died. It's the same thing. And that opened up my mind to start thinking about how we can now have conversations about grief and how she can process grief. Because these young people, they don't necessarily feel like they always have an outlet. They don't feel like they have anyone they can talk to a lot of times. They don't feel like they have anyone who can understand their hurt. So that was a teaching moment for me. It was a conversation starter for me. It opened up my ability to now talk with her about anything. Also, we can encourage our young people to tap into their own creativity. I have a friend who has a group that's called POP, or Poem Over Pistols, right? Poems Over Pistols. It's a creative writing group where he teaches young people who have anger management issues to use their pain and use their anger and their hurt in the form of poetry, and to release that hurt and release that pain in the form of poetry. I think someone mentioned creative writing earlier. That's how we can get our young people to channel that anger, how we can get our young people to express themselves in a positive and constructive way. And now, you can, a lot of these young people are expressing themselves. We'll tackle it a little bit more, are expressing themselves on social media, right? You can become creative by creating videos. You can become creative by creating music. You can become creative by your art. So we have to encourage these young people to tap into that creativity. This is probably one of the most creative generations that we've ever seen. Also, we can expose them to the academic achievements of artists who have been successful on the college level. But again, this will require us to do our own research. This will require us to go out and go into the hip hop world and say, well, who are some of these artists that they're listening to, and what have they done? What is their background? Right. This will require us to step over into that other line, right? To go that second mile and say, well, 2 Chainz is a popular artist, but I didn't know that he graduated from Alabama State University on a basketball scholarship. I didn't know that J. Cole graduated from St. John's University on a scholarship with a 3.8 GPA, right? But this would require us to do a little bit more than just criticizing, and I said earlier, condemning the music that they're listening to, the artists that they're listening to. Find out who these folks are outside of music. Use that to your advantage. Use that in your conversations. Use those successes, those positive things that these folks have done to your advantage. Make ideas more relatable and easy to understand. It becomes easier to tap into the mind of the generation when we use things that are most relatable to them, right? Like, I don't know how to use TikTok. I've never made a TikTok in my life. But if I felt there was a need, or there was a young person who could benefit from me getting on TikTok and doing a dance or creating a dance or helping them, guess what? I'm going to be on TikTok. I hope that day never comes. But if it did, I'll be more than willing to. We got to meet them where they are. We have to meet them where they are, because they're not going to get to where we want them to be unless we bring them up, right? We have to get there, meet them at their level, and stop expecting them to already be at our level. We've got to meet them where they are. Also, encourage young people to create their own media, right? Get them involved in creating things like YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter. Use those things to your advantage. We can't be afraid of technology. We can't be afraid of social media. Technology is going to be here long after we're gone. So why not use it? You know, I hear people say, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to use the internet. Listen, there's this thing called YouTube. YouTube will tell you any and everything that you need to know. YouTube has the answer for every problem man has ever created. YouTube would tell you probably how fire was made if you needed them to, right? So we have to do a better job of getting out there and encouraging these young folks to create their own content, create their own media, because that's where they are. That this is a technology-driven generation. We're not going to get around that. We're not going to go back to the age of the Flintstones. We're just not going to do it. It's technology or bust at this point. So use that technology to your advantage in your in your relationships with your young people. Let them know that you know what TikTok is. Let them know that you know what Snapchat is, that you know how to use it, right? It may not necessarily be fun for you, but again, it's not about us. It's about what we're doing to give the young people the tools to equip them to go out into this world. Another question. What can we take away from this workshop to help us better understand African American youth? Let me know in the chat. What can we take away from the workshop to help us better understand African American youth? Was there a strategy? Was there a idea that came to mind during the workshop? Let me know. What do you think are some takeaways from the workshop to help us better understand African American youth? Just drop those in the chat. Takeaways from the workshop. One thing that I can say that I will take away, I'll lead the charge and go first. One thing that I can say that I will take away is that you guys are awesome in terms of the way that you are familiar with the popular artists. I think you all are obviously doing a great job of familiarizing yourself with artists who are popular right now. I saw a lot of comments in the chat about the artist names like Childish Gambino. Beth said Donald Glover. His rap name is Childish Gambino. Lecrae, who was a gospel artist. Lauryn Hill, Erica Badu, Common. Um, I think that's important to really understand and get familiar with that. Stacy said that she can listen to their music and connect with them through social media. That's good. And even if, you know, again, and this culture moves so fast, right? I don't think any adult can be expected to know every single artist that is popular with these young people. I don't think anyone can be expected to know have every single idea of what these young folks are listening to, but we have to at least try to stay up to date, even though it moves really fast, even though it moves way faster than we thought that it did when we were younger. We have to try our best, right? There's a hip hop artist who was shot and killed over the weekend. His name is King Von. I honestly had never even heard of this young man. He was probably 22, 23 years old. But when I found out about him getting killed on social media, and then I went and had a conversation with my daughter, and she knew who he was, and that turned into another conversation about him and his music and the role that he was playing and what he was trying to accomplish and things like that. So good answers. Shayla said, listening without judgments, helping them identify strengths and ways to relate. Catherine says, connecting through social media, listening to youth in general, and finding out what sparks their interest. Good. Kelly says, the importance of meeting kids where they are. Let them know that you are willing to understand the things that they like. Beth said, listen more. Stacy said, I love listening to young people's music. It keeps you young. I want to be the old lady that complains about the noise. Yes, that's the last thing you want to do is be the old person who just said, why are you making all that noise? Or what's all that racket? You know, you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person. Eden said kids are getting messages about who they think they are supposed to be from media. We need to challenge these young people to think about who they want to be and their thoughts about pop culture in a knowledgeable way, meet them where they are, and bring it up. Good answers. Good answers. Good answers, guys. So that's going to conclude this portion of the workshop for me. I want to be sure that everyone follows me, though. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook, do me a favor, pick your phone up right now. I know it's probably sitting right beside you. You've probably been scrolling on Instagram while I was talking, but that's fine. I don't judge. Pick up your phone, follow me on Instagram, like me on Facebook at The Glad Dad, on all social media platforms, at The Glad Dad. And shoot me a message. If you want to chat a little bit further, feel free, shoot me a DM, shoot me an inbox, so we can chat a little bit more about some of the issues that you might be facing and how I can help. I'm always around to help people out. My passion is helping people build bridges and build connections with young people, because I think we have to meet them where they are. I think we have to connect with them. I think we have to give them all that we have if you want to save this next generation. And also, just lastly, I'll say this: I'm doing a virtual training on December 3rd. And this virtual training is how we can understand racial and cultural diversity in social work, juvenile justice, and in education. Tickets are on sale right now. There's some early bird tickets. So feel free just to go to my website, DionChavis.com, if you're interested in attending the workshop. I would greatly appreciate it. So get your tickets now. There is an early bird tickets, and we're going to just talk about how we can implement strategies to combat stereotypes. We'll talk about the impact that pop culture has on racism, and we'll talk about some anti-racism language and strategies that we can put into place. All right. So without any further ado, if no one has anything else for me, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and let me know. And again, DionChavis.com is where you can reach me. My email address is dion.chavis@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you, and I will talk to you soon.